You need to come get these children right now, or I'm calling the police." The voice on the other end of the phone was sharp, panicked, and belonged to someone I had never met in my life. I stood frozen in my kitchen doorway, grocery bags still hanging from my wrists, trying to make sense of what this stranger was telling me. The November wind had followed me inside, and I could feel its cold fingers creeping up my spine as her words slowly registered in my exhausted brain. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Who is this?" I managed to ask, my heart already racing with a dread I couldn't yet name. "My name is Dorothy. 2 little kids just showed up at my house in an Uber. The driver said they were supposed to be dropped off at this address for their aunt. But I don't know these children. They're freezing cold and crying, and one of them keeps saying your name. Jacqueline. Are you Jacqueline?" My blood ran cold. I knew immediately whose children she was talking about. My sister Veronica's kids, my niece Chloe, who was 7, and my nephew Mason, who had just turned 5. Those babies were somewhere across town with a stranger, and the temperature outside was hovering around 28 degrees. "Yes, I'm Jacqueline. Please, where are you? What's your address?" She gave me an address on the other side of Columbus, nearly 40 minutes from my apartment. My address was on Maple Avenue. Hers was on Maple Court. Someone had made a terrible mistake, and 2 small children had paid the price for that carelessness. "I'm coming right now. Please keep them inside and keep them warm. I'll be there as fast as I can." I dropped my groceries on the kitchen floor without a second thought and ran back to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of my parking spot with a screech of tires that probably annoyed my neighbors, but I didn't care. All I could think about was Chloe and Mason standing on a stranger's doorstep, scared and confused, wondering why their aunt wasn't there to receive them. My name is Jacqueline, and I am 32 years old. I work as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center here in Columbus, Ohio, helping stroke patients and accident survivors regain their independence. It's rewarding work, the kind that makes you feel like you're actually contributing something meaningful to the world. I went into this field because I wanted to help people, because I believed that everyone deserves someone in their corner when life knocks them down. But for years, my own life had been consumed by a different kind of caregiving entirely, one that was slowly draining me dry and leaving nothing for myself. My sister Veronica is 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was beautiful with her honey blonde hair and bright green eyes, charming in a way that made people want to do things for her, and she knew exactly how to manipulate every situation to her advantage. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who always cleaned up the messes she left behind while she floated onto her next adventure without a backward glance. When Veronica had Chloe 7 years ago, everyone assumed she would finally settle down and become the mother those children deserved. Our parents threw her a lavish baby shower, bought her everything she could possibly need, and celebrated her entry into motherhood like she had accomplished something miraculous. Instead, motherhood became just another burden she expected others to carry for her, while she continued living her life exactly as she pleased. Her mother helped for the first few years, practically raising Chloe while Veronica went out with friends and dated a rotating cast of unsuitable men. But after Mom passed away from cancer 3 years ago, the full weight of Veronica's parenting failures shifted onto my shoulders like a boulder I never agreed to carry. There was no one else. Our father had remarried and moved to Florida, eager to start fresh with his new wife. And I was right there, reliable Jacqueline, always available, always willing to sacrifice. I became the emergency babysitter, the last-minute pickup person, the one who bought school supplies and winter coats, because Veronica always seemed to spend her money on things for herself first. New clothes, expensive dinners, concert tickets, spa days. Meanwhile, her children wore shoes with holes and ate cereal for dinner because there was nothing else in the refrigerator. That morning, before all of this happened, Veronica had called me at work demanding I watch the kids that evening. She had a date, she said. Some new guy she met online who was taking her to a fancy restaurant downtown. She described him like he was going to be the answer to all her problems, like every man before him had been described before disappointment set in. I told her I couldn't do it. I had been fighting a cold all week, my head pounding and my throat raw, and I had already taken on extra shifts to cover for a coworker on maternity leave. I was running on empty, exhausted in a way that went bone deep, and for once, I said no. "You're being selfish," she had snapped at me over the phone. "I never ask you for anything." I almost laughed at that. She asked me for everything, constantly, without any consideration for my time or energy or the life I was trying to build for myself. But I held firm. I told her she needed to find someone else or reschedule her date. I told her I loved the kids, but I physically could not do it tonight. She hung up on me without saying goodbye, and I thought that was the end of it. I never imagined she would put her children in an Uber and send them to what she thought was my address, without even confirming I would be there to receive them. I drove as fast as I legally could, my mind spinning with fury and fear in equal measure. The sun had already set, and the streets were dark except for the glow of streetlights and the headlights of passing cars. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow driver in front of me became an obstacle between me and those children. When I finally pulled up to the address Dorothy had given me, I saw a modest brick house with warm light glowing from the windows. Christmas decorations were already up, twinkling cheerfully in a way that felt obscene given the circumstances. I jumped out of my car and ran to the door, where a woman in her 60s opened it before I could even knock. "You must be Jacqueline," she said, her face a mixture of relief and lingering concern. "They're in the living room." I gave them some hot chocolate and wrapped them in blankets. The little boy was shaking so hard I was afraid he might be going into shock. I rushed past her, my heart hammering against my ribs, and the moment I saw Chloe and Mason huddled together on an unfamiliar couch, something inside me shattered into a million pieces. Chloe was wearing a thin sweater and leggings, no coat, no hat, no gloves. Her lips were pale, and her cheeks were red from the cold, angry patches of color against skin that looked almost gray. Mason was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his little arms wrapped around himself as he shivered despite the blankets Dorothy had piled on top of him. Their faces were chapped and raw from exposure to the bitter November wind, and when they saw me, they both burst into tears. "Aunt Jackie!" Chloe cried, launching herself into my arms with a force that nearly knocked me backward. "We didn't know where we were. The man said this was your house, but it wasn't. And nobody knew us, and we were so scared. Mason was crying, and I didn't know what to do." I held them both as tightly as I could, tears streaming down my own face as I tried to comfort them, while simultaneously checking them for signs of serious harm. Mason was still shaking, his small body trembling against mine like a leaf in a storm, and I realized with horror that his lips had a faint bluish tint. These children had been left outside in freezing temperatures, sent to a stranger's home by their own mother, all because Veronica wanted to go on a date with some man she barely knew. "It's okay," I whispered, even though nothing about this was okay. "I'm here now. You're safe. I've got you. I'm never going to let anything happen to you." Dorothy stood in the doorway, watching us with sympathetic eyes that had probably seen a lot in her 60-plus years on this earth. She explained that the Uber driver had dropped the kids off and left before she even opened the door, that Chloe had been the one to knock because Mason was too cold to move his hands properly. She said she had considered calling the police immediately, but decided to try the number Chloe gave her first, hoping there was some reasonable explanation for two small children appearing on her doorstep in inadequate clothing on a freezing November night. "That little girl is brave," Dorothy said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "She kept telling her brother everything would be fine, that their Aunt Jackie would come. She had your phone number memorized. She said you always come when they need you." I looked at Chloe, at this 7-year-old child who had to be the adult in a terrifying situation because her mother couldn't be bothered to act like a parent. My heart broke for her. shattered into pieces so small I wasn't sure they could ever be put back together. And in that moment, standing in a stranger's living room with two traumatized children in my arms, I knew something had to change. Years of being the backup parent had already stretched me thin. I had sacrificed relationships, turning down men who couldn't understand why I was always canceling plans to take care of my sister's kids. I had turned down job opportunities in other cities because I couldn't leave Chloe and Mason without their only reliable adult. I had put my own goals on hold, my dreams of traveling, of going back to school for my doctorate, of building a life that was truly my own, all because I wanted to make sure those children had at least one person in their lives they could count on. But seeing them like this, shaking and scared and barely dressed for the cold, snapped something inside me that I didn't know could break. This wasn't just irresponsibility anymore. This wasn't Veronica being flaky or forgetful or overwhelmed. This was dangerous. This was negligent. This was the kind of thing that could have killed these children if Dorothy hadn't been home, if she hadn't been kind enough to bring them inside, if any number of small circumstances had been different. And I could no longer pretend otherwise. I thanked Dorothy profusely, apologized for the disruption to her evening, and loaded the kids into my car with the blankets she insisted they keep. She pressed a piece of paper with her phone number into my hand and told me to call if I ever needed anything. If those children ever needed anything. The kindness of this stranger, compared to the carelessness of their own mother, made me want to scream. The whole drive back to my apartment, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at their exhausted, frightened faces, and the anger inside me grew hotter with every passing mile. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, I was shaking with a rage I had never felt before in my life. This had to stop. Tonight had to be the end of it. One way or another, I was going to make sure those children were never put in danger like this again. When we got to my apartment, I ran a warm bath for Mason first, checking his fingers and toes for signs of frostbite, while Chloe sat on the bathroom floor wrapped in a blanket, refusing to let either of us out of her sight. His extremities seemed okay, just very cold, and I thanked God for Dorothy and her quick thinking in getting them inside before serious damage could be done. After both kids were warm and dry and dressed in some old clothes I kept at my place for exactly these kinds of emergencies, I made them soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. They ate ravenously, practically inhaling their food, which told me they probably hadn't had dinner before being shoved into that Uber. Veronica couldn't even be bothered to feed them before sending them across town to fend for themselves. I sat with them at my small kitchen table, watching them eat, and tried to keep my voice calm when I asked Chloe what had happened. I needed to understand exactly how this had unfolded, needed to know every detail of my sister's negligence so I could decide what to do about it. "Mommy said we were going to your house," Chloe explained between bites, her small voice still a little shaky. She called a car on her phone and told the driver where to go. "She said you would be waiting for us when we got there." "Did she call me first? Did she tell you she talked to me and I said it was okay?" Chloe shook her head, her eyes dropping to her plate. "She just said you knew we were coming. She was in a hurry because her friend was picking her up for dinner. She was wearing her fancy dress, the sparkly one." I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the rage that was building in my chest like a living thing. Veronica hadn't even tried to confirm I would be there. She had just assumed I would drop everything and comply, the way I always did. She had dressed herself up in her sparkly dress and sent her children out into the cold without a second thought. And when I didn't magically appear at my apartment to receive the children she sent without warning, those kids ended up stranded in the cold at a stranger's house 40 minutes away. After the kids finished eating, I set them up on my couch with blankets and put on their favorite movie, some animated thing about talking animals that they had seen 100 times before. The familiarity seemed to comfort them, and Mason fell asleep almost immediately, his small body finally relaxing after the trauma of the evening. Chloe stayed awake longer, her eyes fixed on the television but clearly not watching it. "Aunt Jackie?" she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Is Mommy going to be mad at us?" The question broke my heart all over again. This child, who had done absolutely nothing wrong, who had been brave and resourceful in a terrifying situation, was worried about her mother being angry at her. She had been conditioned to expect punishment for things that weren't her fault, to take responsibility for her mother's failures, to walk on eggshells in her own home. "No, honey," I said, stroking her hair gently. "None of this is your fault. You did everything right. You were so brave, and I'm so proud of you. You took care of your brother, and you remembered my phone number, and you stayed calm when everything was scary. That's amazing." She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She had learned, at 7 years old, that her mother's moods were unpredictable, and that staying quiet and compliant was the safest option. No child should have to learn that lesson. No child should carry that weight. Once both kids were asleep, I stepped into my bedroom and pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling as I dialed Veronica's number, but my resolve was iron. For the first time in my entire life, I was going to say what needed to be said. Consequences be damned. She answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear music and laughter in the background. She was still at her dinner, still enjoying her evening out, completely oblivious to the crisis she had created. While her children shivered on a stranger's doorstep, she was drinking wine and flirting with some new man. "Jackie, did the kids get there okay? I meant to call, but we got caught up with drinks and appetizers and—" "Enough," I said, cutting her off. My voice was cold and steady in a way I had never heard it before. "Veronica, those children were dropped at the wrong address. They stood outside in 28-degree weather, in clothes that weren't even close to appropriate for the temperature, at a stranger's house, because you couldn't be bothered to make sure I would actually be home before you put them in a car with a stranger." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her moving away from the noise of the restaurant, probably stepping outside or into a hallway. "What do you mean, wrong address? I put your address in the app myself. You put Maple Court instead of Maple Avenue. And you never called me to confirm. You never checked that I would be there. You just assumed I would drop everything for you, even though I specifically told you this morning that I couldn't watch them tonight." "Well, I figured you'd change your mind. You always do." The casual dismissal in her voice made my blood boil. She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't even concerned about what could have happened to her children. She was annoyed that I was interrupting her evening with this inconvenient phone call. "I found them wrapped in a stranger's blankets, Veronica." Mason's lips were blue. "Blue. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand that your children could have gotten hypothermia, or worse, because you wanted to go on a date? You're overreacting. They're fine, aren't they? Kids are resilient. They bounce back from everything." I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. "They are not fine. They were terrified. Chloe is worried you're going to be mad at them for something that was entirely your fault. She's 7 years old, and she's afraid of making her mother angry for being abandoned in the cold. Look, I don't need a lecture right now. I'm trying to enjoy my evening. I'll pick them up tomorrow morning. Just let them sleep at your place tonight and we'll forget any of this happened." "No," I said, and the word felt like a door slamming shut. "This is not okay. This is not something you can brush off and pretend it didn't happen. You put your children in danger, Veronica. Real, actual danger. And I am done making excuses for you. I am done being your backup plan. I am done watching you treat those kids like inconveniences while you prioritize every man and every party and every selfish whim over their basic safety and well-being. Who do you think you are?" Her voice had gone cold now, the charming mask slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. "I'm their mother. You don't get to tell me how to raise my kids." "Someone has to, because you're clearly not doing it. Those children deserve someone who puts them first, and that person has never been you. You know what, Jackie? You're jealous. You've always been jealous of me because I have kids and you don't. You're 32 and single with no family of your own, so you try to take mine. Well, guess what? They're my children, not yours, and I'll raise them however I see fit." Her words were designed to hurt, and maybe once upon a time they would have. But tonight, standing in my bedroom with 2 traumatized children sleeping in my living room, I was beyond being manipulated by her cruelty. "I'm done with this conversation," I said quietly. "I'm done with being your safety net and your punching bag. Those kids will be here when you're ready to act like a mother. Good night, Veronica." I hung up before she could respond and sat down on my bed, my whole body shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion and something that felt almost like freedom. I had never spoken to my sister like that before. I had never stood up to her, never drawn a line in the sand, never refused to accept her excuses and her manipulation and her endless demands on my time and energy. For the first time in my life, I had said enough. And I meant it. I walked back to the living room and looked at Chloe and Mason's sleeping faces, so peaceful now in the safety of my apartment. Chloe had her arm around Mason even in sleep, protecting him the way she always did, because she had learned early that no one else would. These children had been let down by the one person who was supposed to protect them above all else, and I had enabled it to happen by covering for their mother over and over again. But not anymore. Tonight had drawn a line that could not be undrawn. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do, but I knew with absolute certainty that things could not continue the way they had been. Something had to change, something fundamental and permanent. For the first time in years, I was ready to be the one who changed it. The next morning, I woke up early to find Mason already awake, sitting quietly on the couch and staring out the window at the gray November sky. He looked so small, this little boy who had been through so much the night before, and my heart ached watching him process emotions no 5-year-old should have to feel. I sat down beside him, and he immediately crawled into my lap, something he rarely did anymore now that he considered himself a big kid who was too old for such things. "Aunt Jackie?" he whispered, his voice still rough from sleep and perhaps from crying. "Why did Mommy send us to the wrong house? Didn't she know where you live?" I didn't have an answer that would make sense to a 5-year-old. I didn't have an answer that made sense to me. So I just held him close and told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and that what mattered was that he was safe now, here with me, where nothing bad could happen to him. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow, because this wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern of behavior stretching back years, and I was finally ready to stop pretending otherwise. Veronica arrived around noon, pulling up to my apartment complex in her silver sedan and sauntering up to my door like she was arriving for a casual brunch rather than collecting children she had endangered the night before. She looked polished and put together, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless, and something about that effortless perfection made me irrationally furious. She had probably spent an hour getting ready this morning while her children waited to find out if their mother even cared enough to come for them. She swept into my apartment like nothing had happened, kissing Chloe and Mason on their heads and chattering brightly about how much fun they must have had with their favorite aunt. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how they were doing. She didn't even acknowledge that anything unusual had occurred. "Ready to go, kiddos?" she said with artificial cheerfulness. "Mommy missed you so much. We're going to stop for donuts on the way home. Doesn't that sound yummy?" I watched the kids' faces as they gathered their things. Chloe's expression was carefully blank, the practiced look of a child who had learned to hide her emotions to avoid triggering her mother's unpredictable moods. Mason was more openly hesitant, clinging to my hand until I gently guided him toward his mother, with a reassurance I didn't feel. "We need to talk," I said to Veronica, as the kids headed toward the door. "Now." She waved dismissively, already checking her phone with one hand. "Later, Jackie. I've got things to do today. Errands and stuff. You know how it is." "Now," I insisted, my voice hard enough that she actually looked up from her screen. "The kids can wait in the car for 2 minutes. This is important." Something in my tone must have gotten through to her, because she sighed dramatically and told the children to go ahead. She would be right there. Once they were outside and out of earshot, she turned to me with an expression of annoyed impatience that I had seen 1,000 times before. "What is it?" I really don't have time for another lecture about my parenting choices. "What happened last night can never happen again," I said, keeping my voice low and firm. "Those children could have been seriously hurt, Veronica. Seriously hurt. If Dorothy hadn't been home, if she had been the kind of person who didn't answer her door to strangers, if she had been dangerous instead of kind, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. But it didn't happen," Veronica said with a shrug that made me want to shake her. "You always catastrophize everything, Jackie. The kids are fine. It was a simple address mix-up. These things happen when you're juggling a million responsibilities as a single mom. It was more than that, and you know it. You didn't confirm I would be home. You didn't dress them appropriately for the weather. You didn't check on them until I called you screaming. This isn't about a wrong address, Veronica. This is about a pattern of behavior. A pattern of putting your own wants above their basic needs." Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the charming mask slip to reveal something harder and colder underneath. "Careful, little sister. You're starting to sound like you think you'd be a better mother than me." "I think those kids deserve a mother who puts them first," I replied, refusing to back down despite the warning in her voice. "Whether that's you stepping up or someone else stepping in, I don't care anymore. But I am not going to keep enabling this behavior by cleaning up your messes." "Enabling? I'm their mother. I don't need your permission or your approval to raise my own children. They're mine, not yours, no matter how much you wish otherwise." "No, but you need my help constantly. Every week there's something. Watch the kids because you have a date. Pick them up because you forgot. Buy them winter coats because you spent your money on yourself. And I'm telling you right now that help comes with conditions from now on. No more last-minute demands. No more assuming I'll drop everything for you. And absolutely no more putting those kids in unsafe situations because you can't be bothered to plan ahead." Veronica's face had gone cold, her charm completely evaporated to reveal the contempt underneath. "You've always thought you were better than me, haven't you? Mom's perfect little responsible daughter, always doing everything right while I got blamed for everything wrong. Well, guess what? I don't need you. I don't need your judgment or your conditions or your self-righteous lectures. I can raise my children just fine without you looking over my shoulder." "Fine," I said, and the word tasted like freedom. "Then prove it. Actually take care of your children. Be a real mother to them. Because right now, I'm the one buying their school supplies and making sure they have winter coats and showing up when you can't be bothered." She didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and walked out, slamming my door behind her hard enough to rattle the pictures on my walls. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, wondering if I had just made a terrible mistake by finally pushing back against my sister's entitlement. But then I thought about Chloe, brave little Chloe, who had her aunt's phone number memorized because she knew her mother couldn't always be counted on. I thought about Mason, shivering and confused, his lips tinged blue from the cold. And I knew that whatever fallout came from this confrontation, it was worth it. Those kids deserved better. And one way or another, I was going to make sure they got it. The next few weeks were tense but relatively quiet. Veronica didn't call me, and I didn't call her. I texted the kids occasionally through an old phone I had gotten Chloe for emergencies, just to check in and remind them that I loved them and was thinking about them. Chloe's responses were short, but sweet, usually just heart emojis or brief updates about what they were learning in school. I tried to tell myself that maybe my confrontation had actually gotten through to Veronica. Maybe she was finally stepping up, being more present, actually parenting her children the way she should have been all along. I wanted to believe that people could change, that my sister wasn't a lost cause, that those kids might finally get the mother they deserved. But a voice in the back of my mind whispered that people like Veronica didn't change. They just got better at hiding their dysfunction until the next crisis exposed it all over again. That voice turned out to be right. It was a Thursday evening, about 3 weeks after the Uber incident, when I got a call from Chloe's school. The secretary sounded concerned and slightly accusatory, like she was trying to figure out if she was dealing with a neglectful family or just an unfortunate miscommunication. "Miss Jacqueline, this is Beverly from Oakwood Elementary. I'm calling because no one has picked up Chloe or Mason. School ended over 2 hours ago, and we've been trying to reach their mother without success. You're listed as the emergency contact." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I said, already grabbing my keys and heading for the door. When I arrived at the school, Chloe and Mason were sitting in the main office, their backpacks at their feet, and their expressions far too resigned for children their ages. They didn't look scared or confused like they had the night of the Uber incident. They looked tired, accepting, like this was just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments they had learned to expect. This had clearly happened before, probably more times than I knew about, and the realization made my stomach turn. "Thanks for coming, Miss Jacqueline," the secretary said, her tone warmer now that she could see I was genuinely concerned. "We've left several messages for their mother, but she hasn't responded to any of them. I was about to call you when you answered. Did she know school ended at the regular time today? Was there any schedule change she might have forgotten about? Today was a completely regular day. Same time as always, 2:30 dismissal. This isn't the first time pickup has been delayed." I nodded, my jaw tight with barely contained anger. "I'll take care of it. Thank you for staying with them." I loaded the kids into my car and tried to keep my voice cheerful as I asked about their day. Chloe gave me the standard fine that all kids give when they don't want to talk, but Mason was more forthcoming, chattering about a project they were doing on dinosaurs and how he wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up. I let him talk, grateful for the distraction from the fury building in my chest. When we arrived at Veronica's apartment, the door was unlocked. I pushed it open carefully, not sure what I would find inside, and my heart sank at the scene that greeted me. My sister was passed out on the couch, still in her pajamas at 4:30 in the afternoon, an empty wine bottle on the coffee table beside her. The apartment smelled stale and slightly sour, like no one had opened a window in days. "Chloe, take your brother to your room," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm so I wouldn't frighten them. "Work on your homework together. I'll come check on you in a little bit." Chloe nodded, her face expressionless, and led Mason down the hallway without a word. She had probably seen her mother like this before. She probably knew exactly what was happening and what came next. No 7-year-old should have that kind of weary understanding. Once the kids were out of sight, I walked over to Veronica and shook her shoulder hard. "Wake up. Now." She groaned and blinked at me, confusion slowly giving way to irritation as she recognized my face. "What are you doing here? I didn't invite you over." "The school called me. You didn't pick up your kids, again. They waited for over 2 hours, Veronica. 2 hours in the school office because their mother forgot they existed." She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples like she had a headache. "Good. I hoped it was splitting." "What time is it?" "Almost 5 o'clock. School ended at 2:30. Your children have been waiting for you since then, and you were here passed out drunk in the middle of the afternoon." "I must have fallen asleep," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "I had a rough night. I was out late, and I just needed to rest." "I don't care about your rough night or your need to rest. Your children needed you, and you weren't there for them. Again. This is becoming a pattern, Veronica. Last month you nearly gave them hypothermia by sending them to the wrong address with no coats, and now you're forgetting to pick them up from school because you're too hungover to set an alarm." Veronica's eyes flashed with defensive anger. "I am not hungover. I was tired. Being a single mom isn't easy, you know? You try doing everything by yourself with no help from anyone. Then ask for help. Real help. Not last-minute dumping your kids on whoever happens to be available. Actually plan ahead. Make arrangements. Be present. Be a mother to them instead of treating them like burdens you're constantly trying to offload." "I am a mother," she snapped, finally looking at me directly. "Those kids have a roof over their heads, food to eat, clothes to wear. What more do you want from me? I'm doing the best I can. I want you to prioritize them. I want you to show up for them. I want them to be able to count on you for basic things like getting picked up from school on time. That's not too much to ask from a parent." She stood up too quickly, swayed slightly, and pointed toward the door. "Get out of my house. I don't need your judgment. I don't need you coming in here like you're some kind of saint and acting like you're so much better than me. You don't know what my life is like. This isn't about me being better than you. This is about Chloe and Mason deserving more than they're getting from you. They're my kids, and I'll raise them how I see fit. Now get out before I call the police and tell them you're trespassing in my home." I stared at her for a long moment. This woman who used to be my big sister, who I used to look up to despite all her flaws. I saw the wine-stained lips, the unwashed hair, the defensiveness masking deep-seated denial. And I realized that nothing I said was going to get through to her. She was too far gone into her own narrative to see the truth standing right in front of her. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll leave. But this isn't over, Veronica. Those kids deserve better, and one way or another, they're going to get it. Even if I have to make sure of it myself." I stopped by the kids' room before I left, giving them each a tight hug and promising to see them soon. Chloe's eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall, and Mason clung to me like he was afraid to let go. Walking out of that apartment, leaving them there with a mother who couldn't be counted on, was one of the hardest things I had ever done in my life. That night, I sat in my car outside my own apartment for almost an hour, staring at nothing and trying to figure out what to do. Talking to Veronica wasn't working. Confronting her just made her defensive and hostile. And meanwhile, those kids were suffering, growing up in an environment of chaos and neglect that was shaping who they would become. I thought about my mother, about how she had always made excuses for Veronica, always enabled her worst behaviors while expecting me to clean up the messes. I thought about how that pattern had continued even after she died, with me stepping into the enabler role without even realizing what I was doing. But I also thought about Chloe's brave little face, about Mason's trembling body, about the fear in their eyes whenever they didn't know if their mother would show up for them. They were just children. They didn't choose this life. They didn't deserve any of it. When my sister brushed off the incident as not a big deal and insisted I should be grateful they trust her, the weight of years of manipulation finally became undeniable. This wasn't about one bad night or one address mix-up or one forgotten school pickup. This was about a lifetime of Veronica treating everyone around her as resources to be used, and two innocent children caught in the crossfire of her selfishness. I went inside my apartment, sat down at my computer, and started to type. I documented everything I could remember. The Uber incident with dates and details, the school pickup that never happened, the pattern of last-minute demands and unreliable parenting stretching back years. I noted every time I had bought things for the kids that their mother should have provided, every instance when I had to rearrange my entire schedule to cover for her failures. It felt clinical, putting it all down on paper like that. It felt like a betrayal of the family loyalty that had been drilled into me since childhood, the unspoken rule that you don't air dirty laundry outside the family no matter how dirty it gets. But it also felt necessary. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop covering for someone's destructive behavior and finally shine a light on the truth. I saved the document and closed my laptop, knowing I wasn't ready to act on it yet. But it was there now. The record existed. And for the first time in my life, I was prepared to use it if I had to. The weeks that followed were a precarious balance. I kept my distance from Veronica but stayed in close contact with the kids, texting Chloe regularly and picking them up from school whenever I could manage it. Veronica accepted this arrangement without question, probably relieved to have someone else shoulder some of her responsibilities without having to ask or feel indebted. but I paid attention now in a way I hadn't before. I noticed when Chloe's clothes were dirty or too small, outgrown and never replaced. I noticed when Mason seemed hungry, eating his after-school snack like he hadn't had lunch that day. I noticed the dark circles under Chloe's eyes from stress and poor sleep, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the protective way she always positioned herself between her brother and any potential threat. And I documented everything, every sign of neglect, every red flag, every broken promise. I photographed the inadequate winter clothes, kept receipts for the items I bought them, noted dates and times and specific circumstances. My document grew longer, more damning, more impossible to ignore. Part of me hoped I would never have to use it. Part of me still believed that Veronica might wake up one day, might finally realize what she was doing to her children, might change into the mother they deserved. But that hope grew smaller every day, replaced by a grim certainty that things were only getting worse. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in early December. I had picked the kids up from school as I often did now, and I noticed immediately that Mason was coughing badly, a deep, rattling cough that sounded wrong. His little chest heaved with each breath, and his face was flushed with what was clearly a fever. I asked Chloe how long he had been sick like this. "A few days," she said quietly, her eyes worried. "Maybe a week. Mommy said it was just a cold, and he would get over it on his own." I felt his forehead with the back of my hand. He was burning up, his skin hot and dry to the touch. "We need to take him to the doctor right now," I said, trying to keep my voice calm so I wouldn't frighten them. Chloe shook her head, her expression anxious. "Mommy doesn't like taking us to the doctor. She says they always make a big deal out of nothing and charge too much money." My blood ran cold. I drove straight to an urgent care clinic, and what I found there confirmed my worst fears. Mason had bronchitis that was threatening to turn into pneumonia. The doctor said if he had gone much longer without treatment, he could have ended up in the hospital with a serious respiratory infection. "Has he been to a doctor recently?" the doctor asked me, his expression grave. "His vaccination records show he's behind on several immunizations." "I don't know for certain," I admitted, my voice tight. "I'm his aunt. His mother hasn't been on top of things lately." The doctor's eyes sharpened with professional understanding. "This child shows signs of medical neglect. His immunizations aren't current, and he's noticeably underweight for his age. I'm obligated to tell you that I'll be making a report to the appropriate authorities." "I understand," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about making one myself." After the appointment, I dropped the kids off at my apartment and told them I needed to make some phone calls. Chloe looked at me with those old soul eyes, far too knowing for a 7-year-old, and asked if everything was going to be okay. "I hope so, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But some things need to change, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure they do. I promise." I called Veronica first. She answered on the second ring, her voice annoyed before I even said a word. "What now, Jackie? I'm in the middle of something." "Mason has bronchitis. It was close to turning into pneumonia. He needed a doctor days ago, Veronica. Days. Maybe a week. And you told him it was just a cold." There was a pause on the other end. "He seemed fine to me. Kids get coughs all the time." "He wasn't fine. He was sick and getting sicker because you ignored it. The doctor is making a report to Child Protective Services." "A report?" Her voice went sharp with alarm. "What kind of report?" "Because a child with a fever and a serious respiratory infection being ignored for a week is medical neglect. Because his immunizations aren't up to date. Because he's underweight. Because there's a pattern here, Veronica, and people are starting to notice it." Veronica's voice rose to a shriek. "How dare you take my kid to a doctor without my permission? You had absolutely no right to do that." "I had every right. I'm listed as his emergency contact, remember? The one the school calls when you can't be bothered to pick up your own children. And I'm telling you right now, this has gone too far. You need to get help. You need to do better. Because if you don't, I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect those kids. Whatever it takes. Are you threatening me? You're actually threatening to take my children away from me? I'm telling you the truth. The doctor is making a report whether I want him to or not. And honestly, Veronica, I think it's about time someone did. She hung up on me with a shriek of rage, but I wasn't finished. My hands were trembling as I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the number I had saved weeks ago, but never had the courage to call. After documenting the incident, taking photos of the kid's condition, and gathering the Uber receipt forwarded by the driver, I dialed Child Protective Services with trembling hands. The woman who answered was calm and professional, her voice gentle as she asked me to explain my concerns. I told her everything. The Uber incident with the wrong address and the freezing children, the forgotten school pickups, the untreated illness, the pattern of neglect that had been escalating for years. I gave her dates and details, photographs and documentation. I heard my own voice crack as I described finding Mason with blue-tinged lips, finding him burning with fever, finding 2 children who had learned to take care of themselves because their mother couldn't be counted on to do it. "You're doing the right thing," the woman said when I finished. "This is exactly the kind of situation we need to know about. Someone from our office will be in touch with you very soon." After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. I had just reported my own sister to Child Protective Services. I had just set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. My family would probably never forgive me. Veronica would definitely never forgive me. I had broken the unspoken code of family loyalty that had governed my entire life. But Chloe and Mason were asleep in my living room, safe and warm. Mason's breathing easier now that he finally had the medication he needed. And looking at their peaceful faces, I knew in my heart that I had made the right choice. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. But some lines absolutely need to be crossed to protect the people who cannot protect themselves. Within hours, authorities arrived at Veronica's apartment, and the screaming voicemail that followed made it painfully clear that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. "How could you do this to me?" Veronica shrieked into my voicemail at 11 o'clock that night, her voice raw with fury. "They showed up at my door asking questions about my parenting. My parenting. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? You are dead to me, Jacqueline. Dead. I will never, ever forgive you for this. You have destroyed this family. You have destroyed everything." I listened to the message 3 times, each time feeling a strange mixture of guilt and relief washing over me in equal waves. Guilt because she was my sister, because family loyalty had been ingrained in me from birth, because part of me still loved her despite everything she had done. Relief because someone was finally paying attention to what was happening to those children. Someone with the power to actually make changes. Someone who would put Chloe and Mason first in a way that Veronica never had. The war had begun, and I was finally ready to fight it. The following days were pure chaos. My phone rang constantly with calls from relatives I barely spoke to, all of them demanding to know how I could have betrayed my own sister. My Aunt Patricia accused me of being jealous of Veronica's life and wanting to steal her children. My cousin Thomas said I had always been the difficult one, who couldn't just let things go. Even my father, who had largely stayed out of Veronica's life since his divorce and remarriage, called from Florida to express his deep disappointment. "Family handles things within the family," he said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "You don't go running to the government with your problems. That's not how we raised you." "This isn't about family politics, Dad. This is about children's safety. Chloe and Mason were being neglected. They were in danger. Veronica is their mother. She knows what's best for them. She's going through a hard time and she needs support, not judgment. Does she know what's best? Because I've spent the last 3 years watching her put her own needs above theirs every single day. And I've spent those same years cleaning up her messes while everyone else looked the other way. I'm done pretending everything is fine. Those kids deserve better." He hung up on me without another word, and I realized with a clarity that hurt somewhere deep in my chest that I was now the villain in my own family's story. The traitor. The one who broke the sacred code of loyalty that had kept us all pretending everything was fine while 2 children suffered in plain sight. Despite the guilt and pressure from extended family, I held firm. I knew the kids' safety mattered more than my sister's anger, more than family harmony, more than my own comfort. Every time I doubted myself, every time the guilt threatened to overwhelm me, I thought about Chloe's brave face and Mason's trembling body, and I knew I had made the right choice. The only choice. The CPS investigation moved quickly, far more quickly than I had expected. Investigators interviewed Veronica at her apartment, documenting the state of the home and asking detailed questions about her routines and parenting practices. They interviewed the children separately at school, with trained specialists who knew how to talk to kids without leading them or frightening them. They interviewed me at length, going through every piece of documentation I had collected. They talked to the doctor who had treated Mason's bronchitis, to the school administrators who had documentation of the multiple forgotten pickups, to Dorothy, who had found 2 freezing children on her doorstep that November night. The picture that emerged from all these interviews was damning. This wasn't a case of one mistake or one bad day. This was a pattern of neglect stretching back years. A mother who consistently prioritized her own desires over her children's basic needs. Veronica, for her part, tried to charm her way out of it. She was good at that, had always been good at it, using her beauty and charisma to make people want to believe her. She presented herself as an overwhelmed single mother doing her very best. A victim of an overbearing and jealous younger sister who wanted to steal her children. She cried on cue, promised to do better, swore that everything had been blown completely out of proportion. But this time, her charm wasn't enough. The evidence was too clear, the pattern too well established, the children's own words too revealing. Chloe, with heartbreaking honesty, had told the investigator that she sometimes pretended to be sick on days when she was afraid her mother would forget to pick them up, because then she could stay safe in the nurse's office until someone eventually came for her. Mason had described nights when he went to bed hungry because there was no food in the house, and his mother was too tired to cook or order anything. As investigators uncovered the full extent of the pattern of neglect, Veronica was ordered into mandatory parenting classes and supervised visits, sending shockwaves through the family. The court hearing was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Veronica glared at me from across the courtroom with pure hatred burning in her eyes, and I forced myself not to look away from her fury. The judge reviewed all the evidence methodically, listened to testimony from the CPS investigator, and delivered a verdict that changed everything. Veronica would retain custody of her children, but under strict supervision and court oversight. She was required to complete a full course of parenting classes and submit to regular home visits from social workers. She had to maintain a stable, safe environment for the children, with adequate food, appropriate clothing, and proper medical care. Any further incidents of neglect, no matter how minor they might seem, would result in immediate removal of the children from her care. And in a decision that surprised everyone, I was granted expanded visitation rights, including overnight stays every other weekend, and the legal ability to pick the kids up from school whenever I deemed it necessary. The court had recognized that I was the stable adult in these children's lives, and they were ensuring I could continue to be there for them. It wasn't a perfect solution. In a perfect world, Veronica would have woken up, gotten help, and become the mother her children deserved. But this wasn't a perfect world, and I had learned the hard way to work with reality rather than wishes. At least now there were safeguards in place. At least now someone was watching. The family fallout continued for months after the court decision. My Aunt Patricia stopped speaking to me entirely, going so far as to cross the street to avoid me when we happened to be in the same grocery store. My father communicated only through terse, disappointed text messages that made clear he considered me a traitor to the family. Even my cousin Jessica, who had always been somewhat sympathetic to my frustrations with Veronica, told me over coffee one afternoon that I had gone too far. "You could have handled this differently," Jessica said, stirring her latte without meeting my eyes. "You could have talked to her more, tried to help her instead of turning her in to the authorities like some kind of criminal." "I did try," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the hurt. For years I tried. I covered for her, cleaned up her messes, put my own life on hold to take care of her children. And nothing ever changed. It only got worse with every passing year. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone's destructive behavior and force them to face consequences. Jessica shook her head sadly. I just can't imagine turning in my own sister. Family is supposed to stick together. And I couldn't imagine watching those kids suffer anymore, while everyone else in the family pretended nothing was wrong. We didn't speak again for several months after that conversation. I had become a pariah in my own family, the cautionary tale they told each other about what happened when you prioritize children's welfare over family loyalty. But here's the thing that kept me going. I didn't regret it. Not for a single moment. Not during the worst of the family backlash. Not during the sleepless nights when I questioned everything. Not ever. Because I watched Chloe start to relax for the first time in her young life. Start to smile more freely. Start to believe that there were adults in her world who would actually show up for her without fail. I watched Mason gain weight and energy as he finally received consistent meals and medical care, his persistent cough clearing up completely, his eyes bright with the simple joy that every 5-year-old deserved to feel. I watched them both begin to trust that the world could be safe and predictable, that they didn't have to be on guard all the time, that childhood could actually be about playing and learning rather than surviving. Veronica, to her credit, did show up to her mandated parenting classes. She passed her home inspections, keeping the apartment cleaner than I had seen it in years. She learned slowly and grudgingly how to be a more consistent presence in her children's lives. I wasn't naive enough to think she had fundamentally changed as a person, but she was doing better than before. And for Chloe and Mason's sake, that was something. The supervised visits gradually became less supervised as Veronica demonstrated compliance with the court's requirements. The oversight slowly relaxed as months passed without incident. And through it all, I remained a constant, reliable presence in Chloe and Mason's lives, the aunt who always showed up, who never forgot, who put them first, no matter what. Watching the kids settle into a safer routine, I realized I hadn't betrayed my sister. I had finally protected the only people who truly needed me. 1 year after the CPS report, I sat in my living room with both kids curled up on either side of me, watching a movie and sharing a bowl of popcorn. It was a Friday night, one of my regular weekend visits, and my apartment was filled with the comfortable chaos of childhood. Toys scattered across the floor, crayon drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator, the lingering smell of the homemade pizza we had made together for dinner. "Aunt Jackie?" Chloe said during a quiet moment in the movie. "Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for always being here. Thank you for never forgetting about us." I hugged her tighter, feeling my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Always, baby girl. I will always be here for you. Always." The months continued to pass, and slowly, things settled into a new kind of normal. Veronica and I had reached an uneasy truce, not quite reconciled but no longer actively hostile. She understood, on some level, that I had done what I genuinely believed was necessary to protect her children. She didn't agree with it, probably never would, but she had stopped screaming at me about it. My relationships with the rest of the extended family were slower to heal. Some of them never did, and I had to learn to live with that reality. My Aunt Patricia passed away 2 years later without ever speaking to me again, and I had to carry that weight. But I also had to carry the knowledge that Chloe and Mason were thriving, that they had stable lives and reliable adults and the chance to just be normal kids. The choice I made that December night wasn't easy. It cost me relationships I had valued my entire life. It cost me family harmony, my own peace of mind for many difficult months, and the comfortable role I had always played as the peacekeeper and enabler. But watching Chloe graduate from elementary school, watching Mason discover his passion for animals and dream of becoming a veterinarian, I knew without a shadow of doubt that it had been worth every sacrifice. Sometimes loving someone means protecting them from the people who should have protected them in the first place. Sometimes being family means breaking the code of silence that keeps destructive patterns alive across generations. And sometimes The bravest thing you can do is say, enough, and truly mean it. My sister never thanked me for what I did. She probably never will. But Chloe did, years later, when she was old enough to understand the full picture of what had happened and what her life could have been. She told me that I had saved her childhood, that I had shown her what it meant to have someone fight for her, that I had given her the stability she needed to become the person she wanted to be. That conversation, more than anything else, confirmed what I had always known in my heart. I wasn't the villain of this story, no matter what my family believed. I was just an aunt who loved her niece and nephew enough to do the hard thing, the unpopular thing, the thing that cost her everything. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. In the years that followed, Veronica's life took a predictable and sad trajectory. The court-mandated parenting classes eventually ended, and so did much of her improved behavior. She cycled through a series of unstable relationships, each one more chaotic and shorter-lived than the last. She lost jobs, burned through friendships, and continued to prioritize her own momentary happiness over long-term stability. The supervision requirements had long since lapsed by the time Chloe entered high school, but by then, both children were old enough to advocate for themselves and to call me whenever they needed an escape from their mother's drama. Veronica's apartment became a revolving door of boyfriends and crises, and her children learned to navigate around her chaos rather than being consumed by it. They knew they had somewhere else to go now, someone else who would always take them in. When Chloe turned 18, she moved in with me while attending community college. Mason followed 2 years later, eager to escape the instability of his mother's home. Veronica, faced with an empty apartment and no one left to neglect or manipulate, spiraled further into self-destruction. Last I heard, she was living in a cramped studio apartment on the other side of Columbus, working sporadic shifts at a convenience store, and had burned through every relationship and every bit of family goodwill she had ever possessed. The woman who once seemed so charming and capable, so skilled at getting whatever she wanted from whoever had it to give, had finally run out of people willing to be used. She faces her days alone now, a consequence she built brick by brick with every lie told, every responsibility shirked, every child left shivering on a stranger's doorstep while she pursued her own pleasure. The family that once protected her from accountability has scattered and faded, and she has no one left to blame but herself. As for me, I built a life I never expected to have. Chloe and Mason are adults now, successful and kind and fiercely independent, and they call me every Sunday just to talk about their weeks and share their dreams. I still work at the rehabilitation center, helping patients rebuild their lives one small victory at a time, finding purpose in the work of healing. I've found a peace I didn't know was possible, a contentment that comes from knowing I made the hard choice when it mattered most. Looking back on that December night, on the trembling hands that dialed Child Protective Services, on the family firestorm that followed, I feel no regret, only the quiet satisfaction of having done what was right. I chose those children over loyalty to dysfunction, and that choice shaped everything that came after. Revenge, I've learned, isn't always about making someone pay or watching them suffer. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to participate in their destruction anymore, about building something good from the wreckage they created, about breaking the cycle so the next generation doesn't have to repeat it. And as I watch Chloe and Mason thrive, as I see the confident, compassionate people they've become, I know that my revenge was the best kind, a life well lived, children well loved, and a future that belongs entirely to us.